So after the stem dried out, does not stick, what we need? We get the glue, the flowers. Now, it is necessary that the stems are not so long. From the distance of the rolling clay, from this point where the rolled clay to the point where we will trim, there should be approximately 3 millimeters. Maybe 2 millimeters. That is, we leave a small tip. If, for example, a winding sticks out somewhere, then you can cut it off neatly with scissors. So, and I'll bend a little too, like this. We do the same with the rest of the colors. I cut it off. I leave a small tip. That is, after the clay, approximately 2-3 millimeters should remain. That is, this is the very place into which we will already glue the stem. So, you can again, I repeat, bend later, after everything has already been inserted, glued. I'll do it right away. So, what am I doing? I start with the buds first. It is necessary to glue the very tip of the wire, coated with glue just a little. Now, since the last bud is on the right side, we start gluing on the left. What am I doing? I just stick it into the clay like this, approximately 1.5–2 millimeters deep. Not too much. Here's what happened. Carefully not to break the clay. Here is the bud inserted. Now the next one. I coat it. Now on the right side. Now, carefully. So. I have a winding sticking out here. Now I will cut it off a little. So, it's just that this piece of paper, the winding gets in the way and will stick out, but we need everything, preferably to be very, very neat. So, now, I glue it with glue and carefully insert it on the right side. So, here's what happened. Next, the bud. I insert it again. Gently, I straighten it with my fingers so that, again, we remove the excess glue and gently press it if the clay suddenly starts to stick out. Do not lower it too deeply, approximately 2–2.5 millimeters deep. So, now the flowers turn. Now the right side. I insert. It is easy to insert. Why? Because clay is still very soft, very fresh. The water just dried up a little. It doesn't stick to your hands. And so it is very soft. If the stem lies down for a long time after rolling, then it is already much more difficult to glue it. Why? Because the clay will become denser. and it will already be inconvenient to insert and will not look so neat. It can be inserted, but it can break the clay somewhere, it can stretch, and extra wrinkles can appear. So, another flower. Again, we alternate. Right, left, chess order. I put it down a little. How far away? Again, somewhere around 1 centimeter, somewhere around 1.5 centimeters. This is already regulated as you wish. See that everything is natural. And of course, so that there is not a large distance between the flowers. So that's what happens. Let's do it to the end. So, I cut off the excess wherever is needed. It is imperative, of course, to be dipped into the glue to fix it. Without glue, the flower may enter the clay, but with glue it will fix better, and you will be sure that it will not go anywhere where you tried. So, another one. We must remove excess glue, otherwise it will shine. So, and the last flower remained. That's all. That's all. And now you need to leave it to dry, of course, so that the clay grasps, so that the flower sticks. Here is another option you can do. Build option. And of course, see how it suits you better. Perhaps this option will be much more convenient than the previous one, when the assembly was and the rolling was just clay. This is a fairly simple option. Why simple? Because here you need to look so that there are no joints, the wire doesn't show through anywhere. Perhaps this option is really much easier. Here. Therefore, see which option is more convenient for you, which is more convenient and more interesting. I showed you two options for assemblies. Well, and of course, after drying, I will show you how we will make small leaves, and after the stipules, we will make the leaves. Lily of the Valley leaves. After everything has dried up here, after assembly, after rolling in the stem, we need to make the stipules that are located near the flowers. So, stipules. How are we going to do them? I will make it from unpainted clay. You don't need to paint it, so they should be transparent and thin. And I burst a small amount of clay for this. Unpainted clay. It is desirable, I repeat, if it was fresh. Then it will be, of course, much easier. What will I do? I need latex glue and basic stacks. I take it. You can, of course, use the extruder again. As I show you how I do it, well, I just take a film so that the clay does not dry out. Here, I take a small pea, such one, approximately about 2 millimeters in size. It should be very small. I roll it out, I make such a drop, such with a thinning at the end, a strip. I put it on my index finger and snuggle a little with a stack to get such a drop. Very tiny. Now what needs to be done? A At the base, I coat it with glue a little and begin to glue at the base of the legs of flowers or buds. I start with buds, and I smooth it with my finger here gently. It can be washed off with water. Like this. Here is a stipule turns out. And let's do a few more of the same. Yet again, I take a pea. You can even take less so that they're very small. Because stipules are very thin and light lilies of the valley, I press with my finger and a little stack. And I do the same. Some glue. I apply it to the place where the bud is and press. If it is difficult to process somewhere, then you can squeeze a little with a stack and smooth it with your fingers. So, pea, a droplet. It turned out rather thick. Now I will remove the excess. I press. A drop of glue. And now I'm applying, and I press it gently. So, here is another stipule ready. So, if you see that they are thick, then it is better to remove the excess. They should not be thick. They should be thin and beautiful, graceful. Everything must be done very carefully. Apply and press. You can then bend the edge so that it sticks out. Like this. So, now the second side. Apply and press. The clay is quite white now. At least it looks like that. After drying, it will be almost transparent. It will be less noticeable, but there will be gentle stipules. And at the end they can be tinted with such a brownish tint. The very tops are straight to give a natural look. You don't have to tint. Millet in leaf lilies of the valley, they are always slightly lethargic and have small such brown spots. In general, it is painted. So, like this. I'll clean up a little, making it even smaller, thinner. We try to make it as thin as possible. Sometimes they're so small, even difficult to grasp with your fingers. I sometimes just stack it neatly off the tape. I gently roll out a thin cake of the film, and I simply scrape a small amount with a stack from it, and I get such a successful necessary amount. Quite small. What we need. Fingers all the same grabbed more than necessary. So, the other side. We haven't captured yet here. We press. On the one hand and the other, these handsome ones turn out. Here it is, a small pea. We coat it. We don't even coat it, but put a small drop. You can even put this drop not on the stipule itself, but near the flower. How convenient it is. This is not a fundamental difference. The main thing is to stick. So, we still have a couple of flowers left and everything will be ready. So, one more and that's it. The last baby is left. Here is a stipule, a droplet, and the flower will be ready. We apply to the last flower. Here's what happens. Now I will bend it back a little. Here we have such a twig with lilies of the valley. Now we leave it to dry so that the clay dries up and becomes completely transparent. Here, and now of course, we need to make leaves for the lilies of the valley, which we will now do. In order to make the lily of the valley leaves, we need clay, paint grass green masterclass, latex adhesive, and leaf veneer. The color turned out to be about this shade. I added a small amount of paint to the clay for this color. When you knead the paint a little bit and watch. If it's too light, add a little more. Don't overdo it. Because the more paint you add, the tighter the clay can become and it won't last long. Therefore, take a small amount of clay and a small amount of paint and add gradually. Moreover, the clay, of course, after drying, also darkens a couple of tones. So, since I have already mixed clay with paint, what are we going to do? And then I need another knife because I do not use cutters in this case. I will cut it by hand. I take a small amount of clay. So, I mix it well. And I put it in films and start rolling. We do not make the thickness thin so that it is approximately 1.5 millimeters. Because the leaf must be thick enough. Not thin, otherwise it will torn. If there is a pasta machine, then you can use it and so already set the necessary modes, the required thickness. about 1.5 millimeters. Even probably less. 1.5 is even a lot, approximately 1 millimeter. But again, I'm talking offhand because it's hard for me to say what thickness is obtained. Probably all the same, indeed, 1.5 millimeter is a lot, but 1 millimeter thickness is obtained. What do I do next? Further, I apply the veneer like this, and I just circle it in a stack of clay. I circle it so neatly, pressing down slightly. Here's what happened. The result is such a drawing. Now, when I remove the film, I can calmly draw it neatly with a knife along the picture, a dent. Do not apply strong pressure to avoid cutting the film. Just spending a little while. And I remove the excess clay. Basically, this is a convenient process. And you get the size you need under the veneer. This is if you do not have a cutter. If there is a cutter, then that's great. And now go along the edge to thin it. This must be done so that the leaf has a lively appearance. Remove excess clay. Be sure to film it so that it does not dry out. Now I take a veneer and process it with starch. Not too much, just to powder it. And I will walk a little on the clay, also a little on the leaf. Carefully turn it over. And I will also walk a little on the other side. Now you need to print. To do this, I take a veneer, apply it from all sides in the shape and press it. So, what happens? Where the excess has got out somewhere, we will definitely cut it off. So, we look here from the reverse side. Since the veneer itself has a beautiful curved shape, it is not necessary to process the edges. If you have a different veneer, or you don't have a veneer at all, then you can just give the leaf a slight bend by passing it in a stack like this, neatly along the very edge. Either make the veins, pressing with your fingers, or stretching somewhere. For example, you can stretch the edge like this. And in general, the leaves of the lily of the valley have small bends. You can bend a little inside the leaf, make a slight bend, and from the back side to the outside. Like this. So, now, what are we doing? Until the flower has time to dry, it is necessary to glue the wire so that it keeps its shape well. I will use wire number 22. I take a small segment. Now I take the glue. Of course, the wire can be glued in different ways. You can roll the wire in advance, for example, with clay, so that it is thin but in clay. And then, after drying enough for the clay to set, you can then glue it to the leaf. I will use the usual classical method. I won't do too long. A piece of 4-5 centimeters. I apply it to the middle of the leaf like this and begin to press it with my fingers so that the wire disappears. It is not visible. Create such a vein in the middle with your fingers. On the reverse side, such a bend is quite even. The main thing is not to break the clay. Press gently with your fingers. Here is what happens. And now it is necessary to put the flower in this position to dry. So that this part, half of the leaf, is horizontal. So that the wire doesn't come out anywhere while the leaf dries, and the edge of the leaf can be bent over and left to dry in some way. I'm going to put it to dry. Let the leaf dry. Well, let's say you can even leave it to dry like that, or for foam drying. It will be convenient too, because there you can make additional bends too. Therefore, we leave it to dry and you will need to make another leaf. We do all the same. I take clay. And I roll it out. If you are rolling by hand, to understand what thickness you need, lift a rolled piece of clay to the light and make sure that it does not show through. If it does not shine through, and it is not too thick to the touch in thickness, then this means that this is the thickness that we need. And if it shines through, then it turned out to be thin enough, and you need to make it thicker. I will make this leaf a little smaller. Now I will outline the edge here, and then I will cut it smaller. It will be a little smaller, so I remove the excess. We must walk along the edge. So, now, I powder with starch. In general, starch on the leaves, on the lilies of the valley for example, if you are making tulip, gives the necessary velvety effect. Somehow it is as if the leaves are flattering. It seems not shine, but still some kind of additional ebb. It is precisely attached to the starch. It is difficult to replace it with something else. Talcum powder or powder does not give such an effect. Here, natural lilies of the valley have some kind of bloom on the leaves, which starch creates and complements perfectly. So, we press. In general, you can use a mixture of paints when coloring the leaf clay. Let's say not only herbal green, but let's also use viridonic to add not only warm shade, but let's say a little cold. You can make the leaves darker, but in nature they're different. Slightly darker, slightly lighter, I decided to make the essence of the leaves lighter. We will not tint the leaves with oil paint. Therefore, you can safely not shake off the starch. Let such an interesting velvety effect remain. We will colorize it with pastel along the edge. And so we put the leaves unpainted because they already have an almost lively shade. It is enough light, like natural young lilies of the valley. I call them all snowdrops. Sometimes I get confused. I glue the wire. We do all the same, carefully so as not to break the clay, from the back and especially because this joint where the wire ends, it must be very carefully pressed with your fingers, because an awkward movement can break the clay. Now again you can make a bend. And again I use the dryer for the first leaf. The same thing I'll do for this. I leave it to dry, only now I will bend it a little. I'll make a slightly different bend. Let it be wrapped inside. Here are the leaves. Let them dry out. Next, we will fasten them together, glue them, then add a sprig of lilies of the valley to these two leaves.